Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Mind of Sai Marie. We often explore the boundaries of the human experience on this show, and today we are diving into a world where those boundaries are enforced by code. Zoey Michaels is an independent author and the creative mind behind the Echoed Mind duology. She's here to talk about her latest release, Fractured Shadows, and the high stakes of losing one's individuality to a hive system. Zoe, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you.
Awesome. This sounds like a great book, so I'm going to dive right into the first question. You've described yourself as a chef in the kitchen of imagination. I love that quote.
Thank
Mixing everyday emotions into unique stories. What was the specific ingredient that sparked the idea for EchoLink, a system that assigns people the perfect roles?
Well, I'd say a pinch of annoyance, a little dab of, why is the world this way? And a whole lot of, let's just see where the story goes.
I love that. So, in Fractured Shadows, we see a world where freedom is stripped away for the greater good. As an author and podcaster, do you feel that our modern obsession with connectivity is a precursor to the hive system that you've created?
Well, I certainly hope not. I hope the world ahead of us is not that negative. But there's certain things that I look at the world around us, and it's changed so much, even since I initially wrote this story, that it's like, wow, we are more and more being controlled by computers more than ever. And so I'm a little scared about how close my story is to what's going on.
I can understand that myself. Rowan Greer is an ornithologist who never questioned the system until his niece, Lyra, dragged him into the rebellion. Why did it take a rebellious younger generation to wake him up to the truth that Echo Link is actually a cage?
So I don't know that it was necessarily the fact that she was a younger generation. In my mind, he's a very young uncle, but the fact that it's happening to a close family member. Because very often, some of us are blind to what goes on around us unless it touches us closely. And in the case here, Rowan and Lyra are very close. They've got a wonderful relationship as a niece and uncle.
I love that too. So, you use a phrase from Sweet Home Alabama, thinking sideways, to describe your writing. How did thinking sideways lead you to the concept of humanoid disconnect, and why is the cost of activating it so high?
So when I think of thinking sideways, it's looking at the world from a completely different angle than maybe someone else might look at it. My thought is that whenever I write any story, I don't care if it's sci-fi or if it's, a romance story, I want to come at it from an angle that maybe no one's ever thought to do. In the case of the humanoid disconnect, it's that, here is this plan in place to bring structure and order to this world, supposedly to benefit mankind. And now here's this back door that people have only whispered about, that the creator had put in there because he had concerns. He looked at history and said, look at these wonderful things that people created, but then misused. It got misused. It was not their intention for things to go this way. I want to have a failsafe in place just in case someone decides to misuse what I've created.
So, you've spent years behind the scenes before stepping out as an independent writer. Does the struggle for Rowan and Lyra to reclaim their identity reflect your own journey in finding your voice?
Until you ask that question, I don't know that I consciously ever thought about that. But that could be, that could very well be. The interesting thing about this is, you know, I have done writing in the past, but I never publicly published anything. I wrote one book in my early 20s, kind of as a what I called a homesick project. And I only published it for three people, myself and two friends. And other than that, I did writing. I convinced one of my employers to let me do like a newsletter. But I had what I would call a emotionally traumatic thing happen in my life going on 2 years ago now. And it was as I was recovering from that I finally found my voice. And I was shy about about putting my stories out even at that point. But this was one of the earliest books, the Echoed Mind, right after that period of trauma. And so maybe subconsciously, yes, it was about clearing my throat and finding my voice and speaking up.
I love to hear things like that about, kind of the background story of the way that stories are born and also how it helps the author evolve. Because it really is kind of a metamorphosis. As an author myself, I say that. But for the person your series specifically resonates with Gen X and millennials, I feel like, and I think that it's very relevant now. Why do you think the tension between stability and freedom is so vital for these specific generations to explore at this point in the timeline?
Well, everything about our world today, it's I want to use the expression criminally different than how you and I might have grown up. And I don't know what your age is, but I'll tell you right now, I'm in my 50s. And I had so much freedom as a child, relative, of course, to being, under my parents', guidance. But I felt like I came from a very stable family. Mom didn't work outside the home. I had so much going for me that I even took for granted. And now the latchkey generation now has this other generation, and I don't know what you would call them in the perspective of the latchkey, what the next iteration would be. But the thing is, they need to find out, because where people like me grew up and we could leave the house, be gone for hours, and our parents wouldn't be worried because the neighborhood was safe, and I would go miles away from home on my bicycle. Now in this world, I worry about if a kid goes two doors down the street. So, this is the time for people to be thinking about change and how to make things better for the next generation.
I entirely agree with that. So, for the person listening who feels like they are currently trapped in a life that's handed to them, that is not really living their authenticity, what is the first step toward fighting for the one that they deserve?
I think it really comes down to understanding yourself. And some people, they figure it out early in their life. And I'm so jealous of those people. Some of us maybe get glimpses of it, but assume, well, no, that can't be it. And they keep on looking. I'm a case in point. I sat down and wrote that story back in my early 20s, but I never saw it as a career path. It was a coping mechanism. And even though I took great joy in writing and always did, even as a teenager, no one ever said, hey, you should consider writing stories for a living, or you should consider. I did have one person tell me you should be like a narrator. I just didn't know how to embrace that at that age. Now I kind of wish I'd known more. But figuring out the things you love and talking to people and saying, okay, but could there possibly be a career path in this? That is the first step. And even if it isn't a career path, maybe it could be something supplemental that you do to feed your soul, even if it doesn't line your pocket. And that's where I'm at. In my case, I would love to make a living doing my books and my podcast. Maybe one day it'll come to fruition. But right now, it is my piece of sanity in a world where I do a job to pay the bills and that I do something that feeds my soul.
That is very relatable on so many levels to me. And I think that it is for most creators out there, and especially independent authors. And I want to take a moment to remind everyone that April is Independent Author Month. So, with what she just said, coming on the heels of that, understand that everything we do, these are mostly passion projects. And that support is truly the make or break on whether or not we can continue onto that pathway and the trajectory of being able to do these things full time and for a living that actually, will keep us housed. So that is very important to talk about, and I don't think it's talked about enough, honestly. Finally, if Fractured Shadows were a person standing at the edge of the Echolink system, what would it whisper to someone who's still trapped inside of it?
That's an intriguing question. And I think it would be very deceptive because it's a system that wants to live, right? So it's going to tell you whatever it wants to achieve its goal. It's going to give you the illusion, no, you're free. You don't need to be worried. What are you worried about? Here, let's pacify you with this little thing that you think you want. And here's a synthetic version of it that will make you appear like you've achieved what you wanted, but in reality, you're still in my grasp.
Wow. Deep, but definitely something to consider with systems and our present timeline, especially with the rise of AI. Just because something seems like it might be being straightforward, it's going to be one of those things that you really have to learn to get intuition about and discern for yourself if you should trust that entity, because that's, like you said, it's almost like you predicted the course of the next few years. And it's interesting when we write stories that end up doing that, how it can sometimes make us go, wow, if I had known that I was writing something so prophetic, I don't know if I would have wrote it. But at the same time, coming from a place where you see these things and you start thinking, and maybe you can see a timeline that it's imaginary to begin with, but as anything goes, the kitchen really is a magical place. You take a few ingredients and then you have a cake. These are the things that I believe are, exactly what make creative so important, because we don't know what we're building until it's made.
It's so true. And I find it fascinating. I love the kitchen. I love to cook. That you can take the majority of certain ingredients that are the same across several recipes, whether it's a cake or bread or, some other things, right? So a lot of them are the same basic ingredients, but there's just a tweak or two, and suddenly you have something completely different. So
And I
that's
think that helps emphasize the difference in perspective and how a person can be given some resources and how they're going to apply that to their life, and what they'll create. And it will look different every time. So it's one of the beautiful things that makes us all connected, but yet individual within that framework as well.
so true.
It's been awesome talking to you today. Zoe, thank you so much for sharing your lens and the sideways way of thinking. I think all of us could benefit from looking at life a little differently sometimes. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, when in doubt, stand on your head.
So, to my listeners, you can find Fractured Shadows and The Echoed Mind on Amazon. It's a gripping look at what it means to be human in a world that wants to define you, which right now I think we could all use a very big lesson on. And as always, remember that the mind is the most important story that we'll ever tell. You can catch the link to Zoe's website in the show notes. And thank you for listening to the Mind of Sai Marie.